All right, we talk about the biggest news to happen to Ole Miss Sports in a very, very long time. We'll tell you what that is, plus what is going on between Alabama and Texas A&M. We break it down for you, as well as Tom Vanderford. This is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, and thank you for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. So do me a favor, go to YouTube and subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you haven't, subscribe. If you have, get a friend to subscribe. Also, hit the bell for notifications of new videos going up, which happens quite frequently, and of course, upvote the video itself. The reason we ask you to do this, if we hit 1,000 subscribers by the time football season starts, we will be doing post-game live. Now, we have Ole Miss legends, high school coaches, people that said they would help out. Now, if it's a really late night, it might just be me, but we want to have a 30-minute period where we talk about the game, have the chat module over here where you can participate in the show, and we just talk a little Ole Miss football at the evening. So it should be quite interesting. Should be a lot of fun. That's post-game live, a possibility if we hit 1,000 subscribers before the Troy game. So do that, and we can move on and have a lot of fun with that. All right. The biggest news to hit Ole Miss Sports in years happened yesterday, and nobody's talking about it whatsoever. Especially the way that Ole Miss wants to roster build. And everybody's like, Steve, what are you talking about? What could this thing be? Well, it is the fact that the initial scholarship limit has gone away for 2 years. Now, everybody's like, well, Steve, why is that important? Well, the thing that was holding us back with what we were doing was the fact that a transfer counted as an initial. So it took away from the recruiting class and anything like that, and you ended up having 15 transfers, 10 recruiting class, and you're basically done. That's the 25 signee class. Now, this year, they bumped it up to 32. And you look at what our roster has transformed to. We had 17 players that were rated 4-star or better last year. That was a Sugar Bowl team. That was a good team. This year, 34. The roster transformation is nothing short of phenomenal. And this will allow that transformation to happen. And it also will allow Lane Kiffin to essentially never have a signing day. Because once December and February hit, the signing period for high school kids, it was over. Now it's year-round. It is completely year-round. It's completely open. If you need a couple more players, you get rid of the bottom percent of your roster. You bring those good players in, and you constantly are increasing your talent profile. And this fits the way that Lane Kiffin is building this roster. I tell people all the time, anybody that says to me, this is the way it's always been done, or this is how this has always happened, I immediately don't listen to them because they have discounted the fact that the last 3 years that everything has changed. And now Lane Kiffin, he doesn't even try to build a program at Ole Miss. Now, the potential for volatility is there. I can admit that fine. But it's more of a 2022 team, 2023 team, 2024 team, as opposed to the Ole Miss program. You're not going to see a bunch of fifth-year seniors running around. They're not going to try and build. They're going to try and make the team the best that it can be each and every year. And because of that, there are going to be players that are essentially going to be cut. I mean, for lack of a better word, they'll be cut. And you will go to the transfer portal and try and upgrade them. There could be some one-for-ones. You could look at your room and you're like, hey, I've got too many linebackers and I don't have enough wide receivers. Why don't we just switch it out one-for-one and start working on that? And you can do that pretty consistently throughout the year. And when Lane Kiffin got to Ole Miss, he built a player personnel department, a real-life NFL-type player personnel department where they have people that look at high school film and they have people that look at other college players. And they decide kind of what they're going to hit in the free agent market, because Lane Kiffin calls it the free agent market. And he wants to dominate using that. And there's a reason for that. This isn't fool's gold. This isn't him trying to be cute. This is him acting out of necessity. That's really important to remember. We are not a traditional recruiter like Alabama, like Georgia, like Clemson, like Oklahoma. Nothing like that. We are not an NIL monster like Florida, like Tennessee, like Oregon, like Miami, like Texas A&M, Texas. Those monsters. We're not that either. So the other way that you can build a roster is through the transfer portal. It's not overly expensive NIL-wise. We can play in that market because we are a relatively poor school. Don't let anybody tell you differently. If they're saying they have more money than the people at state, that's kind of like a valedictorian and summer school argument because they're both schools in the same state. And we are not traditional recruiters, and we will not become traditional recruiters. We kind of lost that window after the probation hit. If Hugh Freeze could have won for a couple more years and kind of got rolling, it might have looked completely different. But that probation stunted all of that momentum. Every single bit of it. And because of that, we have to do the things we have to do. There's nothing wrong with being a transfer portal school. Are we going to have more volatile classes? Potentially. Is there not going to be quite as much consistency? Potentially. Is the upside worth it? Definitely. You just look at the talent profile of this roster, and it in no way matches what we are normally recruiting at. I mean, players like Jared Ivey, J.J. Pegues, Aisheem Young, Ladarius Tennyson. I mean, 4 stars all over the place that in high school or coming out of high school just didn't really look at us. But in the transfer portal, since we finished in the top 2, whenever there's like, oh, we're unhappy, this is something, any 18, 19-year-old kid, they're going to freak out at some point. Well, it's nice to be that second choice right there. And now with the one-time transfer, they can take it. And because of that, and them not having another transfer, Ole Miss can really build its roster. I mean, this initials going away is absolutely huge. Just saw what Lane Kiffin was able to do when they gave him 32, which would be roughly 10 less than half of the class, or half of the team for total numbers of scholarships. Blue chip players now. Imagine what he'll be able to do in 2 years with no limits. And also, by the way, you can leave your comment section below while they're doing this. I think the NCAA is doing all of this on purpose to try and run the Power 5 football people off, just the football people, and let them form their own thing because they do not want all the money that they do not get associated with the NCAA. It becomes a not worth it situation for them. So it is what it is. I love brownies, but do you know what I love more? Brownie batter. Sometimes I eat half of that just while I'm making the brownies. Imagine if you could lick the brownie spatula clean and get some protein in. You're in luck because Built has a new creation, and this one is better than ever. The Brownie Batter Puff. You heard me right. This puff takes protein bars to a whole new level. And they're available right now at Built.com. Have you tried the Built Puffs yet? I'm not sure what you're waiting for. Puffs are chocolate-covered marshmallow protein bars. That's right. Delicious flavored marshmallow covered in 100% real chocolate. So here's the offer. Go to Built.com. Use promo code LOCKED15, all one word, and get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. All right, thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. Now make sure you go check out the Locked On NBA Big Board. Host Raphael Barlow from the NBA Draft Junkies and authors of the NBA Big Board newsletter is joined by Richard Strayman, Sam Ferris, and Leif Tholen, giving fans a in-depth look at the NBA Draft, mock draft, player rankings, and of course, big boards. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast. So, first segment, we talked about the initials going away and how big it would be for Ole Miss, and we kind of compared it to this year's 32 class and all that. Well, this is all part of a growing, ecosystem inside college football, to where you have the traditional recruiters like Alabama and Georgia and Clemson and Oklahoma, those guys that are kind of over here. Then over here you have the NIL guys, the Texas A&M, Tennessee's, Miami's, Oregon's, those guys. They're sitting over here, and they're kind of cannibalizing each other, okay? So what was over here with the traditional recruiters, there's about 6 teams that just had their pick of the litter of all the good players in the country. All the 5 stars would kind of go to them. And they could build monsters that just couldn't be caught, and is unlike in any period we had in college football, maybe since the beginning when Yale was out there dominating. Well, on this side's the NIL guys that are trying to take some of those players that were traditional recruiters' locks and getting them away. So the traditional recruiters are going to end up getting less blue chip players. They're going to get more on the NIL side. Okay? So what was 50 players spread over 4 or 5 teams before is now going to be 50 players spread over 10. That's the point. So it's going to bring all of the top down. Okay, does that make sense? All of the top's going to come down. Now, I'm not going to say they're going to be bad. That's not it. You don't get to that level by being poor at what you do. But it is going to lower the margin of error. Now, the third way is the transfer portal, and that's what Ole Miss is doing, and all that's fun. But Lane Kiffin has talked about over and over again about how NIL is happening and how people are using it and taking advantage of. And basically, high bidders, I refer to it as drinking from the fire hose. But if you look at what's really going on, like Texas A&M is rumored to have paid $31 million for a signing class. Nick Saban absolutely went off, right? He talked about how every single one of their signing class was bought. And this was in a public forum. It was absolutely crazy. Completely unprompted in a public forum, which tells me they lost on somebody that they thought they were going to get, that they normally would get, but they couldn't meet the bid. That's what that tells me. And the traditional recruiters like Alabama and Georgia and Oklahoma and Clemson are freaking out over this. Because what they could recruit to and the things that they could do, they can't necessarily do anymore. The eliteness of recruiting to them. You can't just recruit to the playoff and that'll be good enough. Now you need to recruit to the playoff and produce money. Now, here's the biggest misconception. It might cost $8 million for a quarterback to go to Tennessee. And the rumor about Nico and all that. That same quarterback would probably go to Alabama for $4 million. It would probably go to Jackson State for $12 million. So what I'm saying is there's a sliding scale for NIL depending on where you go. So these traditional recruiters like Alabama are still going to have the advantage over some place like Tennessee. Now, the thing about Tennessee is they do have that money. But remember this. We do not know what NIL is going to do. I compare them to NFTs. 3 years ago, an NFT sold for $380,000. That same NFT just went on the market and sold for $115,000. Let the market correct itself. Okay, so Nick Saban talked about Texas A&M buying all their players, every one of them. Jimbo Fisher got on there and he kind of doth protest too much. But he did say him and Saban are done and that Saban was a narcissist and that people should look into him. And I was like, whoa, what's going on here? And so it was very interesting. That's the reason the thumbnail says he went Jerry Springer, is because he did. He did just started airing out all kinds of grievances and talked about how he wouldn't take his phone call. If they would have been on stage, Jimbo Fisher would have charged him and threw a punch wildly and missed by 6 feet. I have no doubt of that. So here's the thing, and this is what people need to understand. They're both right. They're like, wait, Steve, how can that be the case? Well, the NIL collectives are not communicating officially with the coaching staff. He's not directing activities. It's not an arm of the university. It's completely separate. So technically, he has no knowledge and he hasn't ordered anything. But those collectives, how they know who to target, I don't know. But Jimbo Fisher is correct that he had no official contact that we know of. Now, it might be total BS and there's something in the background. There's always going to be a paper trail now because there's contracts that have to be signed. But Nick Saban said they had to pay everybody, which technically they did. If that NIL collective paid those players, even post-enrollment, to get them on campus, they still bought the recruiting class. And here's the thing, A&M. Why do you care? You're doing what you can do. It's legal. It's absolutely fine. Quit apologizing for it. It makes you look guilty of something that you're not really guilty of. Nick Saban's right. Jimbo Fisher's right. Them arguing back and forth, everybody's going to talk about that, but they're not talking about the fact that, yeah, both of these guys have a point. Nick Saban in Alabama has no right to bitch about Jimbo Fisher at A&M and how he recruited his class, because if he did it above board. You can pay these guys. They can make money now. Just because they have money, they don't need to apologize for it. And how Nick Saban built the most dominant college program in the history of football, and there might be skeletons in the closet, yeah, probably, but do we care? No. So either way, just simmer down, guys. Now, I will say this. Texas A&M and Alabama this year has become must-see TV. Absolutely become must-see TV. We're talking an NFL-like number going to get thrown up. And it's going to deserve it because this is going to simmer for a month. Remember, in like 11 days, 10 days, the SEC coaching meetings happen to where Jimbo and Saban have to meet. Do you think reporters are going to hound them down there, down in Destin? Oh, I think so. I think Greg Sankey is going to sit all the coaches down and say, what are you doing? Why are we doing this? If you want to bitch about USC, do it. Leave these guys alone. They're sitting there raising rugs looking for dust. They all have dirty hands. They all have blood on their hands. And if you want to dare everybody to look into them, they're going to look into you too. It's one of those build two graves type situations. So, understand all that. And I guess that's the point of all this. It's nothing. It's all performative. Both coaches are absolutely correct. But neither situation is wrong. You live your whole life in a gray area and there's no right or wrong, really. That's what's going on here. But we're still waiting on the market to come out. We don't know who is going to actually own this in 2 or 3 years. Whenever it comes down, there's actually a market. We're not going to have any idea until then. So my concern right now is people putting their thumb on the scale, basically, of NIL to make sure that it's equitable now. And that's going to end up making it really bad. And everybody's going to say, see, in 10 years, told you this wouldn't work. Yeah, it didn't work because you messed with it. So let's see what happens. Root for the team because of the uniform they're playing. Because as I said, the age of college football mercenaries is here. They almost need to take the names off the back of the jersey at this point. Because it's not really going to change your rooting interest in there. There's not going to be the same relationship with players that you used to have. There's not going to be the same relationship with coaches that you used to have. There are going to be some people that are just so deathly afraid of change. Do not mess with this. That's fine. Yeah, do whatever you need to do. But I'm just telling you the way it's going to be. The age of the college football mercenary is here. Anyway, our partners at BetOnline continue to be the #1 source for all of your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest odds and news and sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, fights, and even next season's NFL futures. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs to esports and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. I think that Ole Miss is a 33-1 That's the odds for them to win the SEC championship. Anyway, BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including iTunes. So don't forget to rate and review us on iTunes. You can say whatever you want to say. Just leave us a 5-star review. Again, it doesn't matter what you say. Just make sure it's a 5-star review to begin with, and we'll have a lot of fun with that. So thank you, everybody, for coming in. All right. In the first segment, we talked about the initials rule. The second segment, we talked a little bit about the Saban and Jimbo Fisher kerfuffle that's going on right now, to quote Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Now, let's talk a little bit about what this means for Ole Miss and why this is important. You've got all the background with the rule change that has happened and the fight that is currently happening. And we talk all the time about how the traditional recruiters are really at war with the NIL guys. And they're going to fight back and forth over and over about what's happening. And that is going to cause the recruiting classes to get worse and worse. So it's going to bring the top down a little bit. Now, the important thing is Ole Miss is a transfer portal recruiter. Just absolutely is a transfer portal recruiter. And they've gotten to the point where they're kind of dominant in the transfer portal. So this fight and this going back and forth is going to result in more players in more places, which means they are going to be less likely to stay where they are. There's going to be more players like Zach Evans, more players like Jared Ivey, more players like Isheem Young than there have ever been before. They're going to be in places that are not necessarily blue blood places. They're not necessarily a place that you would expect would be able to handle players of their stature. So they're going to get pissed off and they're going to leave because they're 18 and 19-year-old kids. So there's going to be players with 2 and 3 years of eligibility entering the portal, and that's where Ole Miss comes in. This fight and everything going on, them bringing the top down a little bit, everything more, a little bit more down. Once they add the extended playoff games, it's going to come down even a little further. The only chance Ole Miss has to really build an elite roster. Now, they could build a roster like Mississippi State does and like everybody else does. But the only chance they have to build an elite roster is the transfer portal. And this, I just said, benefits Ole Miss. This whole show is about how this whole situation benefits Ole Miss from the very beginning of it. You can believe whatever you want to believe, but if you hear somebody tell you, it's like, okay, this is the way it's always been done, immediately run away because they don't know what they're talking about. It's an amazing thing. Now, you've got let's say the media. I'm just going to say the media, but basically the rivals 24/7 and On3 that so desperately want to go back to the old days to where there was a signing day on the first Wednesday in February and they could build up to that date with all their content. Well, that kind of messed up with the early signing day. So now all of a sudden there's less people signing, and everything. And then you've got the transfer portal now that is going to be year round. Now that initials are going to go away and the 85 is there, there's going to be players that get cut. Especially at schools like the Alabama and all that. The amount of patience they're going to have with 18-year-old kids is probably going to surprise some people. It's going to be a what have you done for me lately on steroids. And also, make no mistake, this will affect coaches as well. You might see a coach have a losing season after several winning seasons in a row, and all of a sudden, hey, they wipe their hands of them, gone, let's move on. And you're also going to see boosters that get in the way and mess this up. That's one of the few things I'm happy that Ole Miss isn't really in the NIL game. Now, they're trying. There's players. I've told you several times, Ole Miss basically has the budget to be competitive on 10 kids in the high school class. But they don't have enough. They can't do a full class. Ole Miss just does not have the resources to do a full class of NIL. But you can sign 9, 10 players. Absolutely. And because all this is changing, it's amazing. Boosters are going to become less and less important, and especially at a school like Ole Miss, a school that is projected to get $100 million worth of TV money in the near future. Think about that, $100 million. When I was at Ole Miss, and this was 15 years ago, that's all it was, 15 years ago, the athletic budget was $30 million. And it was still almost all booster raised. They had so much practice, so many hangers-on, so many people that tried to collect coaches and players. They were everywhere. I got stalked around Walmart. It was ridiculous. But now, thanks to that added TV money, the traditional rivalries of the SEC, all that stuff is going to go out the window. I foresee a future to where Ole Miss doesn't play Mississippi State in this big thing. Because right now, Ole Miss would move on to the next level. Mississippi State would fall down below. If there was a super league, Ole Miss would go up. So, just get ready for some weird things to happen in college sports. That's all I'm saying. Just get some weird things ready to happen, because while this will all benefit Ole Miss, it's not going to look exactly like you're used to. And people might think that things are wrong. And that's more along the lines of, oh, this is the information that I'm comfortable with. We should always do it this way. And that's also the reason why boosters completely mess this up every time once in a generation coach leaves the school. Ole Miss, Tennessee, Alabama the first time. Whenever that happens, there's always a huge drop-off, and there's a reason for that. Tom Osborne, Philip Fulmer. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Bo Schembechler. Man, it's crazy. But thank you very much, and everybody have a good weekend. Tom couldn't make it today because of some family commitments that he had. Hope everything's going well with him. But this has been the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy the baseball. Have a good time. Let's get ready for the SEC tournament and potentially the NCAA tournament. So I'm Stephen Willis at the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. And, of course, peace.